Thank you for having me. My name is Christian. I'm a software developer and co-founder of a software studio that builds custom software for industrial clients. And today I'm going to talk about how we actually use Ruby on Rails in order to do that. The talk itself has three parts. First part, I want to introduce you to the concept of industry. What does that actually mean? The second part is about who the hell I actually am and why I'm hopefully qualified to talk about all of this. And the third most interesting part is how we use Rails in order to do for our clients what we do. So let's start with the what. We're working for clients from the manufacturing industry. That means companies that produce tangible goods and their distributors. All of this started around 70-60 in a more or less organized fashion. And so far in industry, we had three major milestones. The first one was the Industrial Revolution itself. Was ushered in by the invention of the steam machine in the 17th and 18th century in the United Kingdom. And the idea was to reduce manual labor necessary to produce goods. These people back in the day mostly produced goods of daily need, like clothing and food. Shortly after, the second industrial revolution followed. This time it was ushered in by the discovery of electricity, as you can see by Mr. Nikola Tesla here sitting in front of his famous Tesla coil. By automation, think about Henry Ford and the Model T, and by general scientific progress happened 1870 to 1890. And again, we achieved higher productivity, so we could create more product with less manual labor. The third industrial revolution, we've just completed actually, was all about microchips. ICs have been invented in the 1960s, and with the rise of computers, we could actually create robots that can manufacture goods. We call this CAM, computer-aided manufacturing. We got PCs in order to design products, which we call CAD, computer-aided design. And then we got these digital networks that connect everything to everything. And this is what we just recently accomplished. So in 2002, historians say that we finally are been done with the third industrial revolution. And now we are at the brink of the fourth, the most interesting one, if you ask me. Because the fourth industrial revolution is all about software. It will be ushered in by software and interconnectivity, so we're building on the third. And we're just at the beginning of this. And the fourth industrial revolution actually has three major parts. The first one is the software is now smart. It is economic. So if I'm a worker and I have to bring some material on a shop floor from position A to position B, I now have a handheld device, probably an iPhone or iPad, that tells me what material, in what quantity, I have to bring from where to where. So the idea in this industrial revolution is no longer to reduce manual tasks, it is to reduce the mental workload. Intelligent software helps people to perform their tasks more easily, especially the surrounding tasks, so they can focus on the actual creation of their products. It is also about connected entities, because now data is everywhere. We have APIs, we have barcode scanners, we have RFIDs, we have workpieces that can actually tell the machine what kind of workpiece they are, what kind of material they are, how they need to be processed. And what we're doing is we're effectively dragging the IT onto the shop floor. In recent years, IT has been some white-collar thing, where people in the office were using computers, but not so much on the shop floor, except for the actual robots. And now we are moving the technology onto the shop floor with tablets and with phones in order to support people to create things. And it's also about clean interfaces. We now have a very high information density because we measure so much stuff, so we need to visualize complex operations for human beings in order to allow them to have insight into the production process. And if something goes wrong, they need to fix that quickly. So interface design is a key component of this fourth industrial revolution. And that's what we actually do. The company is called Crispy Mountain. We are based in Frankfurt, Germany. And as you can see from this vest, this is what our office looks like. This is the machinery that we're working with on a daily basis. It has no Wi-Fi connection, and there is no Ethernet port on that one. It's actually from the 1970s. Sometimes we have to do some programming, so we go back to here, which is our office. And we're kind of an alien in this whole industry thing, because our competitors, the other companies, are SAP, Siemens, just all the large companies in the world that you can imagine. And they basically invented most of the software that is currently used in production management. and they still mostly adhere to the waterfall model of creating software. So basically, they're doing what they did in the last 20 or 30 years, although now the paradigms have shifted a little bit, and they run into trouble, and this is where we come in. So we are using Rails because we have a web background instead of C, C++, or SAP. We are only 8 people instead of 80, which is normal size for an IT project in manufacturing industry. And we're trying to deploy on a daily basis instead of once per year. So we try to employ tools like continuous integration, which is basically unheard of in this industry. Usually you have one software release per year, and that's it. And in order to be able to deliver on all these promises, we use Rails. And I want to introduce now to 6 lessons that we learned using Rails in this industrial context in the last 2 years. Short disclaimer first, these lessons are obviously specific to us and probably highly biased. Spoiler alert, I like turbolinks. But I think that even if you do consumer applications, even if you do other stuff, that some of these learnings are also applicable to you. So let's start. The first lesson is mise en place. Who knows what it is? And we have a few chefs here. So there's a brilliant blog article by Jason Benson about this topic. And mise en place is a culinary concept, as you can see on the picture. And it means that before you start cooking, you have to prepare all your ingredients, and you have to set up all your tools. So basically, you can cook your meal with a blindfold on. A good chef can do that. And in terms of software, of computer industry, I think that it has basically 3 dimensions. The first dimension, before you start even writing the first line of code, regards your company. So think about what you're good at. And we are software writers. We are good at writing software. So we're not good at taxes. We're not good at bookkeeping. We are not lawyers. So we outsourced all of that stuff so we can focus on our daily work. Think about communication. We are using Slack exclusively. All our clients have a Slack channel, and believe me, it was not easy to kind of integrate them into the process, but it's a really nice thing because now we don't have a million emails flying around, but we have a dedicated Slack channel for every project, which works really well. And something that hurt myself, we actually outsourced all of our servers. So all of our services are based on Heroku. Their administrators are doing the job. It's not like we can't do that because we're not administrators. Most of us have a DevOps background, but we don't have the time to do that. And these Heroku guys, or any other company, we're just with Heroku, they're really good at what they do because their Postgres team does Postgres 24/7, 365 days a year. I would never dream of being that good in regards to Postgres. So we outsourced the whole thing. We don't run a single own server, so we can focus on what we are good at, writing software. So we have the company as dimension for mise en place, and we have also the climate. Make sure that you have a working environment that is nice, where people can learn from each other, and where people are allowed to fail. Because if you allow people to fail, they will come to you with the failures. If you don't, the failure will happen anyway, but perhaps in a software that's just been deployed. If you have an encouraging culture about this, people will come to you more early. And share your knowledge, especially if you're a small team like us that's working on different projects at once. We have a weekly meeting where we share knowledge. And the meeting is always twofold. One is introducing new technologies, and the other one is telling everyone about what happened last week and what didn't work out so well. And the third part of mise en place after company and climate is now actually coding. So we are trying to have more or less the same software installation on every device. We don't use the same editors. I like Atom, other guys like Emacs, others like Vim, but at least all the 3 of them are available in every machine. So if I go on a coworker's machine, I can start right away. Every project is always installed. We have the same database versions, the same Redis versions. We have a secure and nice way to distribute credentials for production and development across all of the devices. So when I need to take over a project, I don't need to waste 30 minutes in setting it up. I can do it right away. Next lesson that we learned is use proven tools. Do not experiment. So there was this one time that we discovered we had a shortage in iOS developers. We only have like 1.5 iOS developer, and we needed to create a software that ran on iOS and also on Android devices. So we gave Cordova a try. And inside this Cordova container ran Ember.js. And we did it as a research project. Actually, I did it as a research project. because I really liked Ember. I've seen the to-do application, and the to-do application was really nice. And then something hit me. I realized something, which has connection to this picture. The to-do application, and every framework has that, right? You go on a website, you see a web framework or some other framework, some other coding stuff, and the to-do application is always the prime example. The to-do application is the equivalent to walking into a crowded bar and you see that girl or that boy across the room and you immediately fall in love. This to-do application has much nicer syntax, and the concepts are so clean, it's much better than the framework that you're currently using. Well, it doesn't remain like that, right? After the 5th or 6th or 7th date, you might start seeing some flaws. And I think it's the same with frameworks. So why I like Rails so much is because I'm working with it since 9 years. We are an old couple. I know its strengths, I also know its weaknesses. And I know Rails got a lot of weaknesses, like every other framework. The difference is I know them, so I can work around them. When I plan a project, I immediately know which parts will be tricky. When I use a new framework like PhoneGap, and this is actually what happened to us, we had a problem in the browser on some Android devices, which we just couldn't fix because we were so far away from the hardware that there was no way of fixing that. Because we used a tool that was unknown to us, which came with its own problems, but we didn't know the problems in the beginning. So use tools that you know the problems of. Also, try to use high-gain tools. This is now where TurboLinks comes in. We are a small team, we're 8 people, so working really fast is paramount to us. We have deadlines, and we have clients that don't like deadlines to be broken. So in a perfect world, if I had unlimited resources, unlimited time, and a big developer team, I'd say use an MVC framework on the client side, and use a lean framework for just on the server side, just as an API, and transmit JSON data semantically from the backend to the front end. That's really nice. However, we discovered that for us, this process just doesn't work because it's much slower. It's much slower than using just Rails backend, more or less a monolith. And for the front end, we're using HTML, Sass, CSS. And we're not transferring anything with JSON. We're using TurboLinks 3, which will be available in Rails 5, but there's also backport available, so you can use it now. And we're not transferring semantic data, but we're transferring entire views. And actually, in the use cases that we do, we have a lot of views, we have a lot of different views. This was by far the fastest option that we had. We tried several approaches, we tried Ember, we tried Angular, we tried this monolith, and strangely or not, the monolith always was the fastest way to go. And I know it's not super clean, it's only 80%, but this is something that I learned in the last 2 years, 80% is usually good enough. We're trying to strive for 90, but actually 80% is good enough, and last 20% are going to kill you, because that's where the money and the time goes into. So ask yourselves, do I really have to go 100%? Mostly you don't. You have to iterate quickly, and you need to talk to your users. This is actually one of our applications, and it's used in Warehouse. And as you can see, the buttons are rather large. The problem that we had, one day we were in this warehouse and we were talking to the forklift driver, and he said, okay, the application is quite nice, but I have trouble hitting the buttons. And the first thing I said is, yeah, okay, you have gloves on, so you need to buy these kind of gloves, you know, where you can actually use the smartphone with. And he said, yeah, we have them. That's not the problem. The problem is that your buttons are too small. And we just realized, okay, that's true. If you have gloves on, it's really difficult to hit small buttons. We would have never seen that in our confined office environment, you know, where there is everything nice and there will be gin tonics at 1600 hours every single day. That's not the dirty shop floor, that's a different world. So what we had to do, we had to talk to our customers, and this is absolutely true whether you make industrial software or consumer software. It's really, really important. And sometimes you probably don't really know who your client actually is, because for us, the client is the manager, right? Because he's paying the bill. But the user is someone different. The user is the forklift driver. He is the one who has to use the software. And the problem is that sometimes you can make your clients happy, but not your users, which will be eventually a bad thing. So always look out for the user. If you have an app, for example, that's paid by ads, then your client and your user are two different people. The money comes not from the user itself, but from someone else. So you have to make sure that you always keep these two people in sync. Because if your users are happy, the client will also be happy. So talk to the people. Don't do something in your basement and after 6 months come out with it. Iterate quickly, fail quickly, change quickly. So probably the biggest lesson for me was to just expect anything, because everything can happen if you work in the real world. Emilia Bedelia likes to talk to computers. I'm sure she would have loved to talk to this thing. That's an Apache volumetric scanner, and it uses lasers. Always wanted to do that. In order to scan a parcel that you put in there. So it basically gives you a height, width, and depth, and it gives you the weight, and it also scans barcodes. And we had a project with a customer, and this basically was the idea to connect this to Rails backend. It does not have a JSON API. It actually uploads files, CSV files, to FTP, which is, in the cargo industry, you know, this is pretty much standard. So what for us is RESTful, for them is CSV and FTP. SFTP if you're lucky, but mostly not. So it's a miracle that parcels actually can, you know, travel from one continent to another. And we had to connect this thing. And not only that one. In the last 12 months, I connected SOAP, I connected CSV, XML via FTP, via REST, JSON, some strange formats I've never seen, some formats whose specification is probably older than me. We've been tapping into TCP protocols directly, and we really did some weird shit there. But there is no way around it, because unfortunately, we're not working in a green field. And I always envy DHH and Basecamp, because, you know, they say, well, product management has to work like this, and we create the software to work like that, right? So they design the process, and they design the software. That's really cool, but we can't do that. We have a process that is not only implemented in one company, but it actually goes across 5 or 6 companies. There is no way you're going to change this process. So what we did is we tried to fight this with structure. So first thing is we fight these many data sources with structure. We have a very robust job handling system that we hopefully can open source one day. We have very robust testing for all of this, because if you take in external data, you want this to be tested, because it is actually kind of a detective or lawyer thing. Every single time something fails, the other party will tell that it's you who fails, right? It's never them. So if you have a test, you just run one command and you can say, okay, no, it's not us. It's actually something on your side. The second thing is you have to fight dirty data with structure. So we're getting data in from this scanner, for example. This has nothing to do with our internal data model, and it shouldn't. So what we did is we created modules we call serializers and deserializers. And we just extend our own objects with those serializers and deserializers, depending on which kind of input we get. And inside this module, we have all the code that transfers this strange, dirty data into our nice and clean data model. So it's nicely encapsulated, locked away. You don't have to look at it when you look at the core model base, which really needs to be clean. Because if you start messing around there, then you will create software that's not maintainable in the long run. But if you modularize, then it's easier for you to maintain the software in the long run. Because believe me, new data formats will emerge and you will have to connect new machines. So you really need to do that. And even in a consumer kind of way, you have to connect to different APIs. So you have to transfer data from one format into another. It is easy to say, well, I'm in a green field, right? Especially if you're doing consumer software. But I challenge you to really think about it. For example, if you create a messenger application, are you really in a green field? I mean, everybody out there who uses a smartphone has some mental concept of what a messenger application should look like. If you go too far off this concept, people probably won't like your app. So sometimes we think we are working on a green field and a clean slate and we can start at zero, but actually we can't. And to mentalize this right early on is very important, I think, because it prevents you from going into the wrong direction. Referring to this old couple thing again, I know that Rails has weaknesses, and I think one of the biggest weaknesses is the view part, because it's not very object-oriented, and you have this helper concept, which is kind of nice if you're doing a to-do application, But if you do something bigger, then it might fail. And in our line of work, we have billions of views. We have to draw stuff on big terminal screens. Unfortunately, this one is empty. I couldn't get a better picture. We have this kind of kiosk views where a lorry driver registers himself. And these are just some random screenshots from applications that we did over the years. Actually, it's pretty much the same one. And it shows sometimes the same data, only in different aspects. Oopsie. Oh, no. Oh, that should be a big surprise. Just pretend you haven't seen that. So the problem here, coming back to point 6, right? We're still at point 6, no dessert yet. The problem here, or we had, is that we have some data model, for example, a material transfer. We are bringing stuff from A to B. For the person on the shop floor who actually brings this stuff from A to B, it is entirely irrelevant how much it costs. But for the people in bookkeeping, it is very relevant. And since we are creating the whole software, we are covering the whole process, we have the problem that we have to visualize the same data differently. Now you can put everything in one big helper module, and everyone in one big controller, and your templates are full of if statements, if the user is this role or that role or this role, and it's really crap. You can't really maintain this, especially if you have 5, 6, 7 roles. There is no chance of doing that. So again, what we do, we try to fight this with structure. First thing is, we are only working with Haml, SAS, and CoffeeScript, which allowed us to work much faster. And what I really love about Haml is that it gives you this kind of more, I'd say, objectified approach to writing templates, because you just write dot and then a class name, and you created a div with that class. And for us, what it did, it actually tied the CSS people way more closer to the programmers, to the back-end people. And that's something really spectacular. Haml is kind of strange in the beginning, or at least I felt that way, but once you've gotten used to it, you would never want to go back. Then we're using namespaces, so we are separating our applications into namespaces which are modeled like real-like processes. So these namespaces could be pre-production, production, post-production, warehouse, bookkeeping. And we might have 5 product controllers, one in each namespace, because the people in pre-production, they need to see other stuff from a product than the people in bookkeeping. Maybe bookkeeping doesn't even have to have access to products at all, because they just do the invoicing. This allowed us to first keep our routing table a little bit more clean, because sometimes we have 600, 700 routes in there, and with this namespacing, you have created smaller monoliths instead of just one big one. I won't use the word microservice because it's not true. And we're also make massive use of decorators in order to give a model the ability to present itself in different contexts. Jesus. And this is why we actually invented this whole strategy, or actually used this whole strategy, because we realized that even if we use decorators, one model needs sometimes 5, 6, 7 different decorators, right? Because it has different attributes in different contexts. Contexts, it's a hard word. So, again, one of the key points here is to fight chaos with structure. And whether you are in a consumer environment or your industrial environment, sooner or later your project will grow. And if you start using these namespacing things and decorators and stuff like that early on, you won't have to refactor everything in the end. Number 7, which is kind of a bonus lesson that I learned in the last 2 years. This thing is called pastel de nata. And I'm not eloquent enough to put in words how it tastes. I just say that it's like you take a piece of heaven and transform it into edible form. I should really try one while we're here. All right. Quite in the beginning of the talk, I said that you shouldn't do any experiments, that you should only do proven tools. That's not quite true. Sometimes you need to experiment. You need to fiddle around, because if you don't, then you will be stuck with the tools that you used for 20 years, and, well, in 20 years, they won't cut it anymore. So if you do experimentation, don't do it on production stuff. And this is actually, one of these lessons, or many of these lessons we anticipated. Some of these lessons we learned the hard way. And this most certainly was a lesson that I myself learned the hard way, because 10 years ago, I jumped on every bandwagon. There was a new framework, and I tried it. And I tried it in a production kind of way, right? And it's not a good idea, because usually you don't see the problems when you start, you see the problems when you're 80% done. And you only have 2 weeks to complete the project. And the only option to kind of salvage it is to redo it in some other framework within 2 weeks. Probably not a good idea. So fiddle around, play around, Elixir, Rust, Crystal, all amazing stuff. I never thought that I myself would say that one day, but probably I'm so old now, I can never use a 1.0 version, because in an industrial context, it's not stable enough. But you can play around with it in your spare time, in your time that you do. Actually, you should set aside time for playing around and see new concepts, because actually, even if you decide that Elixir is not for you, you might see concepts, programming concepts that you can also use in your Rails application or in your Ruby application or somewhere else. So you should really do that. Now, let's talk about what I took away from the last 2 years with this industrial software. It's not only the mise en place, the proven tools, the high-gain tools, the fast iteration, the expecting everything, the fighting of chaos with structure, and eating pastel de nata. It's also that the work that we did in the last 2 years is really, really amazing. And when we started, actually, to go that road, I was really skeptical, because we were all web developers, or still are, and we came from a consumer background. And I had the impression that manufacturing software, industrial software, is something boring, something for old people, something for old software, something for waterfall approaches, something for the SAPs and Siemens and whatnot out there. And I didn't really see us fitting in that area. And I could not have been more wrong. And if you take anything away from this talk, then let it be the following message. The world gets more digital every single day. 7 years ago or 10 years ago, none of us had a smartphone, right? And the transition is actually so fast that we can even notice it. Usually people who live through technology transitions, they don't notice that anything happened. They only notice it in retrospect, like 20 years later. Oh yeah, when we got the first TV. But this transition is so fast that we can actually, while sitting in the middle of it, we can actually notice it. And it doesn't only go on in our pockets with our smartphones, it also happens in the industry. And the industry, manufacturing industry, whoever, needs skilled programmers, skilled interface designers, people like you and people like me. And we can really shape the future here. And this is what's so amazing about this kind of work. We can bring people into a position where they don't have to do repeatedly dull mental tasks, like typing in an Excel sheet every single day over and over again, because system A is not electronically connected to system B. So what they do is they print out an Excel sheet, they fax it over, and you have to enter the data again. This will not exist anymore in 50 years. And it's upon us to make this a reality. Thank you.
Hello. I really appreciated your comment about mise en place. The only other time I've ever heard that was also in a coding context, which I thought was a little ironic. But my question to you is, you guys have this seemingly very well put together infrastructure for onboarding clients, and your employees as well are interchanging employees on client projects. Did you set that up kind of piecemeal as things went along, or did you focus on creating that system? I mean, did you do kind of like the big upfront design for kind of the way that you structured that?
You mean in terms of infrastructure or in terms of code?
No, like the way that you've organized.
Organization.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I'd love to say that we had a genius master plan, but it's not true. So we kind of set it up along the road. So the server outsourcing, basically, we did right in the beginning, because we knew that we had no chance with 8 people doing so many projects while maintaining servers. People underestimate how much work that is. Plus, actually, this is industrial, so we are online 365 days, 24/7. if I want to have my own administrators covering this, I basically need like 4 people, right? Because someone has to be on call all the time. So it's very expensive. And the rest of it just came along the way. I mean, Slack I think we're using it for a little bit over a year now. Customer integration in Slack we do for 10 months. And it was just an experiment in the beginning, and then, it kind of, unfolded as we went. Same with bookkeeping. We did the bookkeeping in-house all the time, then we realized we don't have time for that anymore, so we hired a bookkeeper. And the good thing is that when you don't have time for bookkeeping anymore, you actually also have the money to hire a bookkeeper. Because when you still have time for bookkeeping, you don't have the money to hire a bookkeeper. So yeah, we didn't set it up entirely in the beginning, and it's still an ongoing process. There are still stuff that we can outsource, I think.
Yeah, thanks for a great talk. I really related to some of the things you've spoken about, transforming the way other people are working in their day-to-day manual tasks that are becoming automated. My question is, was this a pivot or was it a foundational choice? Because you didn't sound quite convinced of moving to the industry.
It was an accident. So we created a consumer app for a person. I think it was the most consumer app that you could imagine. And he was friends with the CTO of a large cargo handling corporation at Frankfurt Airport. And this is how the first connection was made, and they asked us to do their warehouse software. We initially thought that, well, what the hell should we do there, right? Everything is digitized, they have RFIDs and barcodes, and everything is scanned. We can't do anything for them. Then we visited their location for the first time, and we realized that this is absolutely not true. So they used barcodes which were faulty for like 6 years. Nobody had ever noticed because they were never scanning it. That is the kind of condition that air freight actually is in 2015 or 2014. So that's happening on a daily basis. And this is how we got into that field. And we quickly realized that A, it's super fun to work for those customers. B, you don't have the same money negotiations that you have with startups. Because, a forklift is 200,000 euros. This Apache scanner is like, I don't know, 500,000 or so. So the software is, just not expendable. And you could really make a difference there, and this is why we stuck with it. But yeah, in the beginning I was really skeptical, because Rails or web technologies is not usually what you see in that kind of industrial environment. And we might still hit a roadblock somewhere in the future where we have to, actually we now have a printing software created, and it needs to talk to the machines, which goes with, is over XML, HTTP, but it's not HTTPS, there is no authentication, and we can't hook up those printing machines to the cloud directly. So we basically have to invent some kind of firewall device or something like that. So there are still challenges. And Ruby, obviously, or Rails is not the right choice for this kind of device, right? So we have to figure something out.
So it was a chance meeting that started the whole thing? It was a chance meeting that with meeting the CTO of the Frankfurt Airport that, right.
Well, it was not the CEO of Frankfurt Airport, right? It was
right. So yeah, opportunity.
But yeah, it happened accidentally. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks.
And this is actually one of the reasons why I'm standing here, because to me, as a software developer, I've never seen this field before. I had no connection to it. And it's so huge, and it's so large, and it needs so many developer resources. So if you're fed up with consumer software, please join us. The world is just waiting for more digitization.
All right, I think we actually have to stop there. But if you have questions for Christian,
you can talk to me, of course.
Let's have another round of applause for Christian.
Thank you.